The birthday surprise. I went to surprise my daughter on her birthday, and the first thing I heard made me stop dead in my tracks. "How dare you touch my things? You broke little rat." I froze outside the frosted glass doors of the design department. I was holding a bouquet of sunflowers I bought 12 minutes earlier. Claire had told me that morning she wouldn't be able to celebrate her birthday with me. "I've got a late shift," she'd said. "Maybe this weekend, Dad?" I told her I understood. But I didn't tell her I'd already decided to surprise her at work. She loved sunflowers since she was 4, and I figured walking into her office with a dozen of them would at least make her laugh. Instead, I heard my daughter whisper, "I'm sorry. I thought those were the approved sketches." Her voice was so quiet I almost didn't recognize it. I stepped closer to the glass. My daughter was on her knees, gathering portfolio pages scattered across the floor. A woman stood over her, Marianne Vale. I recognized her immediately, the company's senior design director. I'd seen her name in industry reports and at a few fashion industry events over the years. Beside her stood a younger woman I'd never met, Cassandra. She was a junior designer assigned to the same collection, which explained why she had access to the department. But judging from the expression on her face, she wasn't there to help. "Pick them up properly," Marianne said. Claire reached for another page. Then Marianne's voice became colder. "You had no business opening Archive 17. Claire stopped. "I didn't open it." "You expect me to believe that?" I was told to retrieve the blue folder. The blue folder was outside the archive. "I know." "Then how did you see the sketches?" Claire didn't answer. Cassandra bent down and picked up one of the pages. "Mom." She turned it over. "This isn't the original sketch." Marianne's face changed. "Give me that." Cassandra handed it over. Marianne examined the corner. A tiny handwritten mark sat beside the designer's initials. 17. She folded the page in half. "Claire, listen carefully. You're an intern. Your job is to follow instructions, not investigate things that don't concern you." "I wasn't investigating anything." "Then forget what you saw." That sentence caught my attention, not because it sounded threatening, because it sounded practiced. Like this wasn't the first time Marianne had warned her. I looked at Claire. She was 23, a recent UCLA graduate working her first major internship in the fashion industry. She'd earned the position herself. She had specifically asked me not to use my name to get her through the door. I had kept my promise. But now I was watching someone make her feel like she had no right to be there. Cassandra gave a quiet laugh. She really should have known better. Then she deliberately nudged another stack of sketches off the table. Pages scattered across the floor. Claire stared at them. Nobody moved. I wanted to walk through that door. Every instinct in me screamed to do it. But then Marianne leaned toward Claire and lowered her voice. "If you tell anyone what you saw in Archive 17, your internship is over." Claire went pale. That was when I understood. She wasn't staying quiet because she was weak. She was afraid. And if I stormed in now, I might make whatever she had discovered even worse. So I stepped backward into the alcove. I waited. The two women eventually walked past me without noticing. Cassandra was still talking. Marianne was carrying the sketch marked 17. Neither knew Claire's father was standing only a few feet away. I stayed there until they disappeared around the corner. Then I looked back through the glass. Claire was still on the floor, still gathering her work. I had spent more than 20 years supplying manufacturers and major fashion brands. I wasn't a designer, but I knew the industry, and I knew companies didn't threaten interns over ordinary paperwork. Something was wrong. I walked outside and placed the sunflowers carefully on the passenger seat of my car. Then I called Marcus Webb. He had been my executive assistant for 11 years. If I needed something checked quietly, he was the person I trusted. He answered immediately. "What's going on?" "Start with Claire's project," I said. "Find out who authorized her access to Archive 17. "Okay." "And check the access history." A pause. "Looking for anything specific?" "Anyone who opened that file before Claire did. I'll see what I can find." I hung up. 26 minutes later, my phone rang. Marcus. His voice was unusually careful. "Sir, I found something." "What?" I pulled the archive access log. And Claire's badge was used once. That makes sense. Yes, but that's not what concerns me. I waited. There were 3 earlier access attempts on File 17. By whom? That's the strange part. None of them were made with an employee badge. I sat up. Then how did they get in? I don't know yet, but the system recorded an administrative override. Whose credentials? Marcus hesitated. That's why I'm calling you. I felt my stomach tighten. Whose? Your credentials. I stared through the windshield. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Someone had used my authorization to access the same file my daughter had been warned never to open, and I hadn't known anything about it. Marcus. I finally said, when were those overrides? 3 weeks ago. Anything else? Yes. What? The access requests were all connected to the same internal project number. I already knew what he was going to say. 17. 17. I looked at the sunflowers sitting beside me. A birthday surprise had brought me into that building. Now I was sitting in my car trying to understand why someone had used my credentials to access a file my daughter wasn't supposed to see. And I had a feeling Claire wasn't the only person who was in danger of learning what was inside it. The file no one was supposed to see. Marcus stayed on the phone. There's something else. I leaned back in my seat. What? The 3 administrative overrides weren't random. I frowned. Explain. Someone bypassed a normal access system 3 separate times to get into Archive 17. That got my attention. When? 21 days ago, 14 days ago, and 6 days ago. I looked through the windshield at the glass entrance of the fashion company. 6 days ago? Yeah. What happened that day? I'm still checking. 6 days ago. Claire had called me after work. She'd sounded exhausted. I had asked if everything was okay. Just work stuff, she'd said. I hadn't pushed. Now I wished I had. Pull the security records for those dates. I told Marcus. I already did. And there are gaps. What kind? The camera covering the archive hallway goes dark during each access window. I sat there silently. Someone had bypassed a normal security system 3 times. And each time, the camera covering that hallway just happened to stop recording. That wasn't a technical glitch. Someone had planned around the cameras. Can you recover the footage? I'm working on it. Don't contact the company. I won't. I ended the call. For a few seconds, I just sat there. Then I called Claire. She answered on the 4th ring. Hey, Dad. Happy birthday, sweetheart. Thanks. I brought something for you. She laughed softly. Sunflowers. You know me too well. I know you, Dad. For a moment, hearing her laugh almost made me forget what I'd just seen. Almost. How's work? There was a pause. It's fine. Claire. Really? I'm okay. I knew my daughter. That wasn't an answer. It was a wall. Do you want to come upstairs? No. The answer came instantly. Then she stopped. I heard movement on her end. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Please don't. I looked toward the building. Why? Another pause. I just don't want you here right now. As she said it, I heard her breathing change. Then there was a second sound. A door opening somewhere behind her. Claire glanced away from the phone. At least, that's what I imagined she did. I have to go, Dad. Claire. The call ended. I stared at the screen. She wasn't simply embarrassed. She was worried about what would happen if I walked through those doors. And I needed to know why. Marcus called again before I could decide whether to call her back. Sir, go ahead. I found something about those override requests. What? They weren't created directly inside the archive system. Meaning, each request generated a reference identifier first. I traced the identifier to the company's older records. What did you find? A matching identifier in an archive corporate database. I sat forward. What kind of record? I don't know yet. It's from an older system. The record is partially locked. Can you open it? Not without triggering an audit. Then don't. Already thought of that. That was why I trusted Marcus. He didn't rush when rushing could destroy evidence. Can you tell what the record is? Not completely, but I can see the account classification. What classification? Legacy corporate account. I frowned. Whose? I haven't confirmed that yet. Then don't guess. I won't. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said, but there's something strange. What? The identifier is connected to a business account that hasn't been active in years. I looked down at my hands. Do you recognize the number? Not the whole number, Marcus said, but the identifier matches the last 4 digits of one of your old corporate accounts. I stopped breathing for a second. One of my old accounts? Which company? I'm still confirming that. I didn't say anything. I'd spent more than 20 years building companies that supplied manufacturers and major fashion brands. Old accounts weren't unusual, but this one was, because I hadn't authorized anyone to use my corporate credentials in years. Marcus. Yeah. Keep digging. I will. And don't access the account itself. Understood. A minute later, another message came through on his computer. I could hear the hesitation in his voice. Sir, what now? The archived record just generated a new activity alert. My stomach tightened. Someone's accessing it? Not exactly. What does that mean? Someone is attempting to reactivate the account. I stared through the windshield. The company building stood across the street, completely ordinary from the outside. People walked through the lobby. Cars came and went. Nobody looking at that building would have guessed that someone had been bypassing its security system to reach a file my daughter wasn't supposed to see. And now an old corporate account connected to me was suddenly being touched again. 6 days ago, 14 days ago, 21 days ago, 3 separate attempts, 3 missing stretches of camera footage. And now this. I thought about Claire's voice. Please don't come inside. For the first time, I realized something important. Claire wasn't simply hiding a bad day at work. She was hiding something she believed could put both of us in danger. And I still had no idea what she had seen inside Archive 17. But I was going to find out, even if I had to uncover the truth one piece at a time. What Claire had been hiding. I didn't call Claire again that afternoon. I wanted to. Every few minutes, I picked up my phone, stared at her name, and put it back down. Something was wrong. I knew it. But if my daughter was already frightened, pressing her harder might make her shut down completely. So I waited. Around 4 that afternoon, Marcus called. Anything? Maybe. I could hear papers moving on his end. Claire accessed the archive 6 days ago. I sat up. The same day as one of those override attempts? Exactly. Was she authorized? No. Then how did she get in? She didn't use her own badge. That made me pause. Whose did she use? We haven't identified that yet. But there's something else. What? Her workstation was active during the same window. And someone scanned a document into her temporary project folder. What document? A photograph of a sketch. Send it. My phone buzzed a few seconds later. I opened the image. At first, it looked like an ordinary fashion sketch. Then I saw the mark in the corner. 17. Below it was a date. 6 years earlier. And underneath the date was a name. Evelyn Hart. I knew that name. Evelyn wasn't just another designer. 6 years earlier, she disappeared from the fashion industry after a collection she had been preparing was suddenly pulled before release. There had been rumors, contract disputes, stolen designs, a lawsuit that never became public. But nothing had ever been confirmed. I looked at the photograph again. Marcus. Yeah. Find everything you can about Evelyn Hart. Already started. I zoomed in on the bottom of the page. There was a handwritten note. 4 words. Never released the original. I stared at it. Any idea who wrote that? Not yet. Find out. I will. I ended the call. 6 years ago, Evelyn Hart disappeared. 6 years ago, Claire's mother died. I didn't know if those 2 events were connected. Maybe they weren't. But I couldn't ignore the timing anymore. And suddenly, I wanted to talk to my daughter. Not over the phone. Face to face. I drove to her apartment. When Claire opened the door, she looked exhausted. Dad, can I come in? She stepped aside. I walked into the apartment. Everything looked normal, almost too normal. Her laptop wasn't on the table. That bothered me. Claire never went anywhere without that laptop. She carried it to family dinners. She brought it to my house on weekends. Once, she'd driven 20 minutes back to her apartment because she'd forgotten it. I thought you left your computer at work, I said. Her expression changed for half a second. I did. I didn't argue, but I knew she was lying. Not because I'd seen the computer. Because Claire never left it behind unless something was seriously wrong. I sat down. What's happening at that company? Nothing. Claire. She looked away. Dad, please. I'm not asking because I'm angry. I know. I'm asking because someone is using my credentials to access the same file you were warned about. Her face went completely still. That was enough. You know what I'm talking about. She sat across from me. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered. I didn't know who else to tell. I waited. She stood up and walked into the kitchen. She opened a cabinet. Behind a stack of plates, she pulled out a small black notebook. She placed it on the counter. I started writing things down. I opened it. The entries weren't neat. So were only a few words. Some had dates. Some had names crossed out. One entry read, March 12th. Marianne asked if Dad still owns the old warehouse. Why would she know about that? I turned the page. March 28th. Cassandra knew what company Dad used to supply in Dallas. I never told her. Another. April 3rd. Someone asked why I don't use Dad's last name at work. I looked at Claire. Why didn't you tell me? I thought it would stop. I turned another page. April 19th. Blue folder move again. Nobody admits moving it. Then, May 7th. Marianne told me to stay away from Archive 17. The next page had been torn out. I looked at her. What was on this page? I don't remember. You don't remember? I tore it out because I got scared. I continued reading. The entries became shorter, more frantic. June 2nd. Someone was waiting outside after work. June 11th. Asked about Dad again. June 14th. Don't tell Dad. Then I reached the final page. There was only one entry. The handwriting was pressed so hard into the paper that the ink had almost torn through. If they know I saw what's inside file 17, Dad could be next. I stopped. I read it again. Then I looked at my daughter, Claire. She lowered her eyes. I didn't know who was watching me. Why didn't you come to me? Because every time I thought about telling you, something else happened. What? She hesitated. Things moved. What things? Files. Messages. People. She swallowed. And then they started asking questions about you. The room went quiet. I closed a notebook. Claire, who is they? She shook her head. I don't know, but someone does. She looked at me, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw something in her expression that scared me more than anything I'd heard at the office. She wasn't afraid of losing her job. She was afraid of what might happen if she named the wrong person. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Her face drained of color. What is it? She didn't answer. I watched her thumb hover over the message. Finally, she turned the phone toward me. There was no name, no number, just one sentence. You should have listened the first time. A second message appeared. Now your father knows. Claire looked at me. Neither of us spoke, because whoever had sent that message had just confirmed something terrifying. They knew I was involved, and they knew exactly where to find us. The name on the old contract. I stared at the message on Claire's phone. Now your father knows. I read it twice. Then I looked at my daughter. Has this happened before? She shook her head. Not like this. Have you received messages from this number before? No. Then why did they say the first time? I don't know. She looked terrified. I took a breath and forced myself to stay calm. Claire, we're going to figure this out. She shook her head. Dad, you don't understand. Then explain it to me. She looked toward the window. They know things. What things? Things about you. I felt a cold pressure settle in my chest. Such as? She hesitated. Your old companies? I frowned. What about them? They asked me about one of your warehouses. Which one? The one in Nevada. I stared at her. I hadn't used that warehouse in years. Why would anyone at your company know about that? I don't know. Did Marion ask? Claire shook her head. No. Cassandra? No. Then who? I never saw his face. That was the first time she'd mentioned a man. What did he look like? I don't know. He never came close. Then how did you know it was a man? His voice. What did he say? Claire looked down. He asked if my father still had the original contract. I felt my stomach tighten. What contract? I don't know. Did he mention file 17? No. Then what did he say? She looked at me. He said something about an old collection. My mind immediately went back to the photograph Marcus had sent me. Evelyn Hart. 6 years ago. A collection pulled before release. A handwritten warning. Never release the original. I pulled out my phone. Marcus. He answered quickly. Yeah. Did you find anything on Evelyn Hart? I'm still working on it. Check whether her old collection had anything to do with one of my companies. There was a pause. Why? Just check. I'll call you back. I ended the call. Claire was staring at me. You know something. I know enough to know we're not dealing with a workplace argument. She looked relieved for half a second, then frightened again. Dad? What? I think you should leave. I'm not leaving you here alone. You don't understand. Then make me understand. She opened her mouth. Her phone buzzed again. This time, there was a photograph attached. Claire looked at it first. Then she handed me the phone. It was a picture of my old warehouse in Nevada, taken from across the street. Recently, I stared at the image. The building looked exactly as I remembered it, but there was something in the corner that made my blood run cold. A black SUV, parked beside the loading entrance. Who sent this? I don't know. I zoomed in. The license plate was blurred, but the photograph wasn't random. Whoever took it had been standing across the street, watching the building, watching my old warehouse, watching something, or someone. My phone rang. Marcus. I answered immediately. What did you find? His voice was quiet. I found the connection. To Evelyn? Yes. And she had a contract with one of your companies. I looked at Claire. When? 6 years ago. My heart sank. What was the contract for? Manufacturing and distribution. For what? Her collection. I closed my eyes. The pieces were beginning to line up. Evelyn Hart. 6 years ago. File 17. My company. Claire's mother died that same year. And now someone was digging through records that had been buried for years. Marcus. I said, what happened to the contract? That's where it gets strange. Tell me. The contract was terminated. By whom? Your company. That doesn't make sense. I know. Why was it terminated? That's what I'm trying to find. Keep going. He hesitated. There is one more thing. What? The contract wasn't terminated because of a business dispute. Then why? I found a note attached to the cancellation. What did it say? Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he read it. Do not reproduce. Do not distribute. Do not release under any circumstances. I looked at Claire. Her face had gone pale. Anything else? Yes. What? The cancellation was approved by someone who wasn't supposed to have authority over that account. Who? Marcus didn't answer immediately. Sir, who approved it? I don't know yet. Then find out. I will. The call ended. I turned toward Claire. She was staring at the photograph of the warehouse. Dad? Yeah. I think I know why they were asking about you. Why? She opened her mouth, then stopped. Her eyes moved toward the window. I followed her gaze. A car was parked across the street. Black. Engine running. Neither of us spoke. The car remained there for several seconds. Then it slowly pulled away. Claire whispered, that wasn't there before. I watched the car disappear around the corner. Then I looked down at my phone. The photograph was still open, and suddenly, one question mattered more than anything else. What had happened 6 years ago that someone was willing to threaten my daughter and watch my old warehouse to keep buried? I didn't know the answer yet, but Marcus was already digging. And somewhere inside an old company file, there was a name that was about to change everything. The original, the black SUV from the photograph, was gone. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Someone had photographed my old warehouse. Someone had used my credentials to access File 17. And 6 years earlier, my company had quietly canceled a contract with a designer who disappeared from the industry shortly afterward. There were too many coincidences. I looked at Claire. Stay here. She immediately shook her head. No, Claire, if someone's watching the apartment, I'm not staying here alone. She was right. So I locked the door behind us and drove her to my house. On the way, neither of us said much. When we arrived, I took her straight into my study. I hadn't opened the bottom drawer of my desk in years. Inside were old contracts, shipping records, production documents, and files from the early days of my company. I pulled out a folder marked with a faded date. 6 years ago. I opened it. The first few pages were ordinary. Invoices, manufacturing records, distribution schedules. Then I found it. Evelyn Hart, Collection 17. Claire moved closer. That's her. You've seen this name before? At work. I turned the page. The contract was for manufacturing and distribution. My company had agreed to produce Evelyn's collection under strict confidentiality. But there was something unusual. The contract didn't contain the complete collection. Instead, it referred to a separate document. Original Design Archive, File 17. I stared at the words. This isn't just an archive number. Claire looked at me. What do you mean? The contract specifically separates the original designs from everything else. I turned another page. There was a handwritten note attached to the contract. All originals remain under restricted company custody. Below it was a signature. Mine. I stopped. The signature looked like mine. The initials beside it were mine too. But I didn't remember signing this contract. I had signed thousands of documents over the years. Still, something about this one bothered me. Dad, I don't remember this. Claire looked at me. Could someone have signed it for you? Possibly. I didn't say anything more, but I knew my company had strict rules about executive signatures. If someone had used my name without authorization, that wasn't a paperwork mistake. It was fraud. I called Marcus. He answered quickly. Did you find something? I'm looking at the Evelyn Hart contract. There was a pause. I was afraid you'd find that. Why? Because I found the cancellation record. When? 6 years ago. I know. No, you don't. His voice became quieter. The contract wasn't canceled because Evelyn breached it. Then why? The official reason was production dispute. And the real reason? We don't know. I frowned. Then what exactly did you find? The cancellation was approved 2 days after Evelyn requested the return of her original designs. My eyes went back to the contract. Did she get them? No. Why not? The records don't show that they were ever returned. I looked at Claire. Then were the originals? Marcus was silent. We're trying to find out. I stood up. Keep looking. I am. Then Claire suddenly pointed at the bottom of the page. Dad. I looked closer. There was another handwritten sentence beneath the signature. I'd missed it. Never let them find the original. The room went quiet. That wasn't on the copy I saw at work, Claire whispered. What did you see? A folder with Evelyn's name on it. What was inside? I only saw one page. What page? She hesitated. A photograph. Of what? 3 people. Who? I don't know who 2 of them were. She looked at me, but I recognized one. Who? Your father. I stared at her. My father? She nodded. I felt the air leave the room. My father had been dead for 17 years. He had never worked for my company. He had never been involved in fashion. As far as I knew, he had never even met Evelyn Hart. How could you recognize him? Claire pointed toward the hallway. "The photograph in your study." I followed her gaze. There was an old framed picture of my father beside my desk. "You've seen that photograph 100 times," she said. That's how I knew. I looked back at her. "You're certain?" "Yes." My mind raced. If my father was in that photograph, then the picture couldn't simply be about Evelyn's collection. There was something much older underneath this. Something that existed before Claire was born, before my company became what it was, maybe even before I understood what my own business had become. I picked up my phone. "Marcus." "Yeah." "Find the original contract file." "I already have the digital copy." "No, I mean the physical archive. I'll check the storage records." "Do it." A few minutes passed. Then Marcus called back. His voice was different. "I found a transfer record." "What kind?" "A physical archive shipment." "When?" 2 days after Evelyn's contract was canceled. I stood completely still. "Where was it sent?" "Nevada." My eyes moved toward Claire. "Which facility?" He gave me the address. I recognized it immediately. My old warehouse. The first property I'd bought after building my business from nothing. I hadn't been there in years. "Are you sure?" "I'm looking at the shipping record right now." "What does it say?" "The archive was transferred under restricted storage classification." "Who authorized the transfer?" Marcus paused. "That's the strange part." "What?" "The authorization references the same executive credentials used to access File 17. My stomach tightened. My signature. My credentials. The missing originals. And now my old warehouse. "Marcus," I said, "can you tell what's listed inside the shipment?" "Not yet." "Then find out." "I will." I ended the call. Claire was staring at me. "We're going there, aren't we?" I looked at her. "Yes." "When?" I glanced at the clock. "Tomorrow morning." She looked relieved. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. I opened it. Only one sentence. "There's one more name on the transfer record." I called him immediately. "What name?" He didn't answer for several seconds. Then he said, "Evelyn Hart." I stared at the screen. The original collection hadn't simply disappeared. It had been moved. And 6 years later, someone was still using my credentials to find it. Whatever was inside File 17 had survived all these years. And now we knew exactly where to look. The warehouse. We left for Nevada just after sunrise. It was 2015, and I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling. Neither Claire nor I had slept much. The photograph of my father kept replaying in my mind. He had been dead for 17 years. Yet somehow, 6 years earlier, his face had appeared in a photograph connected to Evelyn Hart and File 17. There was no explanation that made sense. At least, not yet. The drive was quiet for the first 2 hours. Then Claire finally spoke. "Dad." "Yeah." "Are you sure we should be doing this?" I kept my eyes on the highway. "No." She looked at me. I almost smiled, but "I'm going anyway." That earned a small laugh. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh since her birthday. By early afternoon, we reached the old industrial district. My warehouse at the end of a long access road surrounded by empty lots and aging buildings. I hadn't used the place in nearly 8 years. The building looked smaller than I remembered. The paint had faded. The loading doors were covered in dust. But the property still belonged to my company. We had never sold it. And although the warehouse hadn't been used in years, its security system was still connected to the company's property network. I pulled out the old key. It didn't work. I tried again. Nothing. Claire looked at me. "You still have the key?" "I keep things longer than I should." I called Marcus. "I'm at the warehouse." "Good." There was a pause. Then his voice changed. "Sir, don't stay there long." "Why?" "Someone accessed the warehouse security system about 20 minutes ago." I looked at Claire. "What?" "I thought you should know before you went inside." "Can you tell who accessed it?" "Not yet." The connection was routed through an old company terminal. "Can you get me the current access code?" "Already sent it." My phone buzzed. I entered the code. The lock clicked. The gate opened. Claire stared at me. Someone was here 20 minutes ago. Apparently. We walked inside. The smell hit me immediately. Dust, old cardboard, machine oil, and something else I couldn't identify. Claire followed close behind. Where would they have stored the archive? Back room. We crossed the warehouse floor. Most of the old inventory had been cleared out years ago. Along the far wall were rows of metal storage cages. Each one had a faded number. I checked the shipping record on my phone. Cage 17. I stared at it. Claire whispered, "That's not a coincidence." No. We found cage 17 at the end of the row. The lock was newer than the others. I touched it. This wasn't here when I owned this place. How do you know? I installed every lock myself. I stepped back. Someone had secured this cage long after I'd stopped using the warehouse. I called Marcus. "The cage is locked." "Break it." I looked at Claire. "You're sure?" "Sir, if the archive is inside, we need to know before whoever accesses the system comes back." I found an old metal bar near the loading area. After several attempts, the lock finally snapped. The door swung open. Inside were 6 cardboard boxes. 5 were covered in dust. One wasn't. It looked almost new. There was a label on the front. E. Heart Collection 17. Claire stopped breathing. I pulled the box out. It was heavier than it looked. We placed it on the concrete floor. I opened the lid. Inside were folders. Photographs, design sketches, production records, and one sealed envelope. I reached for it. Claire stopped me. "Dad." "What?" "What if that's what they were looking for?" I looked at the envelope. Then we're already too late. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The first thing I noticed was a signature. Mine, again. But this time, beneath it was a date. June 16th, 2009. 6 years earlier. Beside the signature were 3 words. Authorized by Executive Office. I stared at the page. My stomach tightened. I never authorized this. Claire looked at me. "Your signature is on 2 documents now." "I know." "Could someone have copied it?" "Maybe." I turned the paper over. Nothing. No one had authority to use my signature without my approval. I said, "Then who did?" That was the question I couldn't answer. And suddenly, the signature wasn't just suspicious. It was evidence. Someone had either forged my signature or found a way to make my authority appear legitimate. I looked at the document again. The authorization wasn't for a normal shipment. It said, "Transfer all original materials to private storage." No destination was listed, only a handwritten reference. 17 NV, Nevada. I felt a chill. Claire whispered, "So they moved everything here on purpose." "Yes." I opened the next folder. There were photographs of Evelyn's collection. Most showed ordinary designs. Then I reached the final photograph. I stopped. It was the same photograph Claire had described. 3 people stood outside a building. Evelyn was one. A younger man stood beside her. And behind them, my father. I picked up the photograph. My hands were shaking. Claire stepped closer. "That's him." I nodded. "I know." On the back of the photograph was a handwritten date. June 14th, 2009. I stared at it. 2 days before the transfer authorization. My father had been alive then, but he'd never told me he knew Evelyn Hart. Not once. I turned the photograph over again. There was another line written beneath the date. An address. I recognized it immediately. It was the address of the first factory my father had ever worked in. My throat tightened. Why would Evelyn Hart have been there? Why was my father with her? And why had someone moved her original designs to my warehouse 2 days later? Claire suddenly pointed toward the bottom of the box. "Dad." "What?" There. Beneath the photographs was a thinner folder. Its cover was almost completely clean. No dust. Someone had opened it recently. Written across the front were 4 words. File 17, original material. I reached for it. Then my phone rang. "Marcus." I answered. "Marcus." His voice was urgent. "Sir, get out of there." "Why?" The security system just logged another access attempt. From the same terminal? No. My stomach dropped. Then where? He paused. From inside the warehouse. I looked at Claire. Neither of us moved. Then we heard it. A car door slammed outside. Claire grabbed my arm. Footsteps crossed the concrete near the entrance. Slow, deliberate, coming toward us. I looked at the open cage, the photographs, the folder marked File 17. Then I looked toward the warehouse entrance. Someone hadn't merely followed us to Nevada. They had known exactly where we were going. And now, they were walking toward the one thing they'd spent 6 years trying to hide. The man in the warehouse. The footsteps stopped. Claire's fingers tightened around my arm. I whispered, "Don't move." The warehouse went completely silent. Then a shadow crossed a narrow strip of light beneath the office door. Someone was standing on the other side. I looked around. There was nowhere obvious to hide. The storage cage was too exposed. The loading area was too far away. And the main entrance was behind whoever had just walked inside. My phone was still against my ear. "Marcus." I whispered, "Sir, someone's inside." "I know." "You know?" "I've been watching the security feed." My eyes narrowed. "Then tell me where he is." "East corridor." I looked toward the corridor. It was empty. "He's not there." Marcus went silent. Then he said, "The camera just lost power." "Why?" "I don't know." I looked toward the security panel. A small red light was blinking. Someone hadn't simply walked into the warehouse. They had interfered with the security system. The lights flickered. Then the entire building went dark. Claire grabbed my hand. "Dad." "Stay close." A flashlight appeared in the distance. It moved slowly across the concrete floor. The beam passed over the storage cages. Stopped. Moved again. Whoever was carrying it wasn't searching randomly. They were looking for something. Something specific. The light disappeared behind a row of shelves. I leaned toward Claire. "Take the folder." She stared at me. "The File 17 folder?" "Yes." She reached inside the cage and grabbed it. I took the photographs and the sealed documents. We moved quietly toward the rear emergency exit. We were almost there when a voice came from behind us. "Mr. Carter." I froze. Slowly I turned. A man stood about 20 feet away. Mid-40s. Dark jacket. Calm expression. No weapon visible. He wasn't wearing a mask. That somehow made him more unsettling. "How do you know my name?" He looked at me for a moment. "I've been watching the people who've been watching you." My grip tightened around the photographs. "Who are you?" "My name is Daniel Mercer." I didn't recognize him. "What do you want?" "To make sure you don't hand that folder to the wrong person." He looked at Claire. "Claire." She stepped closer to me. "How do you know my daughter?" "I've been following the trail around File 17. "That doesn't answer my question." "No." He glanced toward the entrance. "But explains why I'm here." I stepped between him and Claire. "Start explaining." Daniel took a slow breath. 6 years ago, I started looking into Evelyn Hart's disappearance. I stared at him. "Why?" "Because the official story never made sense." He continued, "I found references to Collection 17. Then I found your company records. Your father's name appeared in the older documents." My heart tightened. "My father?" "Yes." "How?" "I don't know everything yet." That answer sounded more believable than everything else I'd heard that day. But I know enough to recognize when someone is trying to erase the same evidence I'm looking for. I held up the photograph. "Then explain this." Daniel looked at it. "I've seen that photograph before." "Where?" "In a copy of Evelyn's private records." "Who is the man standing beside her?" "I don't know his full story." "You said my father was involved." "He witnessed something." "What?" Daniel's expression changed. "An agreement." "What agreement?" "The original File 17 agreement." I stared at him. "What was it about?" He looked toward the folder in Claire's hands. "Not a fashion collection." "Then what?" "Evidence." "Evidence of what?" Before he could answer, a loud crash came from the front of the warehouse. Daniel turned sharply. His expression changed. "They're here." "Who?" The people who've been trying to recover File 17. Another crash. Someone was forcing the main entrance. I looked at Daniel. How do you know they're coming? Because they accessed the warehouse system before you arrived. Marcus's voice suddenly came through my phone. Walter. I put it back to my ear. What? Get out now. Can you see how many? 3, maybe 4. Daniel pointed toward the emergency exit. You need to go. What about you? He shook his head. They know my face. I frowned. What does that mean? If I leave with you, they'll follow. He looked at Claire. They don't know which exit you're taking. I understood. Daniel wasn't staying because he wanted to be a hero. He was staying because he could draw their attention away from us. Come with us, I said. I can't. Why? Because I've spent 6 years trying to get close enough to these people. He looked toward the entrance. This is the closest I've ever been. The main door burst open. Voices echoed across the warehouse. Daniel stepped away from us. Go. I grabbed Claire's hand. We ran toward the emergency exit. Behind us, Daniel shouted something. Then another voice answered. We pushed through the door and ran into the open air. We reached the car. Claire climbed inside. I started the engine. Before pulling away, I looked back. 3 figures had entered the warehouse. Daniel was standing between them and the storage cages. Then the warehouse lights went out. I drove. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, Claire opened the File 17 folder. Dad. What? She pulled out the first page. It wasn't a fashion sketch. It was a list of names. At the top, Evelyn Hart. Below it, Robert Carter. My father's name. And beneath that was another name. The same unknown name from a photograph. Beside it were 2 words. Primary authorizer. I stared at the page. My father's name wasn't simply written in the file. It was connected to the person who had authorized something. Something important enough to hide for 6 years. Something important enough to threaten Claire. And now I had another question. Who was the man standing beneath my father's name? Because if Daniel was right, that person wasn't just another executive. He was the person who had the authority to make everything disappear. And somewhere in the original file, 17 documents was the proof. The truth inside File 17. I didn't drive home. I drove straight to Marcus's office. Claire sat beside me, holding the File 17 folder against her chest. Neither of us spoke. When we arrived, Marcus was already waiting. His eyes went straight to the folder. That's the original? I think so. He locked the office door before we sat down. Then he opened the folder carefully. Inside were contracts, photographs, production records, handwritten notes, and documents that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Marcus picked up the first page. There's something strange here. What? The paper trail. He placed 2 documents side by side. These contracts were supposed to be finalized through the normal executive process. And someone changed them afterward. I stared at the pages. Changed what? Authorization numbers, distribution instructions, storage locations. He pointed to one line. This wasn't done by a junior employee. How do you know? Because whoever changed these documents understood the company's internal approval system. I looked at my signature. Again, my name, my initials, my authority, but I still couldn't remember approving any of it. Marcus lowered his voice. Walter, someone was using your authority without your knowledge. Claire looked at me. Who? That, Marcus said, is what we're trying to find out. Then he pulled out a small envelope. This was hidden inside the original file. My name was written across it. Walter Carter. My hands went cold. I opened it. Inside was a single letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Evelyn Hart. I began reading. She wrote that she had discovered irregularities in several contracts connected to Collection 17. At first, she thought they were accounting mistakes. Then she noticed something else. The changes were always made after the documents had been approved. Someone inside the company was altering records. Someone with access to executive-level information. Evelyn had tried to trace the changes. She had eventually discovered the identity of the person controlling the operation. But the letter stopped there. No name, no explanation. Only one sentence stood alone near the bottom. Walter, you trusted the wrong person because you had no reason not to. I read it twice. Marcus looked at me. That's all. I nodded. Why wouldn't she name the person? Maybe she was afraid. Or maybe she knew the letter might be found. I looked at the final line. Below it was a date. June 18th, 2009. 2 days after the warehouse transfer. Claire suddenly spoke. Dad. What? Look at the initials. She pointed beneath Evelyn's signature. There were 2 small letters. MC. Marcus frowned. What does that mean? I stared at them. I don't know. Then something hit me. My late wife's initials had been MC. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Claire noticed my expression. Mom! I nodded slowly. Her mother had been gone for 6 years. Pancreatic cancer. She had never mentioned Evelyn Hart to me. Not once. But suddenly I remembered something. A conversation from years ago. My wife had once asked me about an old contract. I'd assumed she was asking because she was curious about my work. Now I remember the exact question. Do you still keep the original contracts from before 2010? At the time, I hadn't thought anything of it. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. Marcus noticed my expression. What? My wife once asked me about the old contracts. He stared at me. Why? I don't know. Did she know about Evelyn? I don't know. That was the worst part. My wife was gone. There was no way to ask her. And I wasn't going to turn a memory into an accusation without evidence. Marcus picked up another document. There's something else. He turned it around. At the bottom was the same authorization reference we'd seen in Nevada, 17NV. But underneath, it was a second code, PA01. Primary authorizer. Marcus said. I looked at him. Can you trace it? I'm trying. He typed rapidly. A few seconds later, he stopped. What? He stared at the screen. The account doesn't exist anymore. Deleted? Not exactly. He looked confused. It was archived. When? 6 years ago. Who archived it? Marcus hesitated. That's the problem. What? The authorization was processed using your executive credentials. Again, my name, my authority, my company. Someone had built an entire trail around me. I leaned back. How many people had access to those credentials? Marcus looked at me. Very few. Names! He hesitated. Walter, before I give you those names, there's something you need to know. What? The primary authorization wasn't created recently. He turned the screen toward me. It was created before Evelyn's contract was canceled. I stared at the date. June 12th, 2009. 2 days before the photograph. 6 days before Evelyn's letter. Someone had planned this before the contract officially disappeared. Then Marcus opened another record. A login history. There was one access attempt 6 years later. The same credentials. The same authorization code. And the location was not Nevada. It was somewhere much closer. My home. I felt a chill. Someone had accessed the old system from my house. After my wife had died, Claire looked at me. Dad? I couldn't answer. The room suddenly felt too small. I thought about the questions my wife had once asked. The old contracts. The company records. The things I dismissed as ordinary. None of it proved anything. But someone had used my credentials for my home. Someone who knew where I kept my records. Someone who knew about File 17. And someone who apparently knew Claire had found it. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. One message. Stop digging. A second message appeared before I could react. You don't know who you're trusting. I showed Marcus. He stared at the screen. Don't reply? I wasn't planning to. I looked down at Evelyn's letter. She had written, you trusted the wrong person because you had no reason not to. For 6 years, I thought she was talking about someone inside my company. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe the person she was warning me about wasn't the person who changed the contracts. Maybe it was someone much closer. Someone who knew my family. Someone who knew my home. someone who had access to the past. And somewhere in the original File 17 records was the name that would finally tell me who had been controlling everything. Marcus looked at me. We need to find that name before they know we found the file. I closed the folder. No. He frowned. No. I stood. Now we need to find out who already knows. Because after 6 years of being lied to, I wasn't going to make the mistake of trusting the first person who offered me the truth. The name behind File 17. Marcus, and I spent the next hour tracing the old authorization code. No one spoke much. The office felt different now. We weren't searching for another clue. We were looking for a name. Finally, Marcus stopped typing. I found it. I leaned forward. What? He turned the monitor toward me. The archived account had been created under a company executive's credentials, but the person who activated it wasn't the executive listed on the account. It was someone else. Someone with administrative access. I read the name, and my stomach dropped. Richard Vale, my former business partner. I hadn't spoken to Richard in nearly 5 years. He'd left the company shortly after Evelyn's contract disappeared. At the time, he'd told me he was retiring. I'd believed him. Marcus looked at me. There's more. He opened another record. Richard had accessed the same archive 3 times. Once in 2009, once 6 years later, and once yesterday. My blood ran cold. He's still involved. Marcus nodded. Looks like it. Then I remembered something. The initials. MC. My late wife's initials. I looked at the document again. Marcus. Check who had access to her credentials. He hesitated. Walter, please. He searched the archived employee records. Then he stopped. His expression changed. What? Your wife never had direct access to the company archive. I felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion. Then why are her initials here? Marcus zoomed in. The initials weren't a signature. They were a reference code. MC Material Custody. I stared at the screen. My wife's initials had nothing to do with her. I'd been looking at the wrong clue. Claire let out a breath. So Mom was involved. No. I shook my head. She was never part of this. For the first time that night, I felt certain of it. But then another question appeared. Why had Evelyn used those initials? Marcus opened the original custody records. There it was. Material Custody, MC. The initials had been used by the company's archival department. Not my wife. Not a person. A department. The mystery was finally starting to separate itself from the memories I'd been blaming. Then my phone rang. Daniel. I answered. Where are you? Safe. What happened at the warehouse? They found the empty cage. Who? Richard's people. I looked at Marcus. Richard Vale? Daniel went silent. You know his name? Yes. Then you know who he is. I know who he was. What's the difference? He wasn't the man running the operation. I frowned. Then who was? Daniel took a breath. Richard was the one carrying out orders. Whose orders? You need to see the last page of File 17. I looked at the folder. It's here. Then open it. I pulled out the final document. At first, it looked like another production record. Then I noticed a signature at the bottom. Not mine, not Richard's, Evelyn's. And beneath it was a handwritten statement. I discovered who was responsible. Walter must never be allowed to sign the final authorization. My heart started pounding. Marcus looked at me. Turned the page. I did. There was a name, one I'd never expected to see. Robert Carter. My father. I stared at it. No. Claire stepped closer. Dad. I couldn't speak. Daniel was still on the phone. Your father wasn't working for Evelyn, he said. Then why is his name there? Because File 17 began before you ever knew about it. I sat down. My father died 17 years ago. I know. So how could he be responsible? He wasn't. Daniel's voice became quieter. He was the person Evelyn trusted. I looked at the document again. Daniel explained what Evelyn had discovered years before the contract was canceled. My father had uncovered a scheme involving confidential designs and company records. He tried to expose it. But before he could, he became seriously ill. Evelyn took over the investigation. She created File 17 as a protected archive containing the evidence. My father helped her hide the original materials. That explained the photograph. It explained why he was with Evelyn. It explained why the archive eventually ended up in my warehouse. But there was still one question. Why did Evelyn disappear? Daniel answered immediately. She didn't. I froze. What? She went into hiding. Why? Because Richard discovered she had copied the evidence. And File 17? She separated it. Why? Because she knew someone would eventually search for it. I looked at Claire. Suddenly, everything made sense. The suspicious women at her office, the missing sketches, the archive, the surveillance. They weren't interested in Claire because of her work. They were interested in what she'd accidentally found. File 17. The evidence my father and Evelyn had hidden, and Richard had spent 6 years trying to recover it. But there was one thing I still couldn't understand. Why me? Daniel answered, because the final authorization required your signature. I stared at him. What authorization? The transfer of ownership. Ownership of what? Everything in File 17. I felt my stomach tighten. Richard hadn't been trying to destroy the file. He'd been trying to obtain it legally, and the only signature that could complete the transfer was mine. My signature had been copied onto earlier documents to make it look as though I'd already approved the process. The entire scheme had been designed to make me unknowingly authorize the final transfer. Claire looked at me. So they needed Dad to sign without knowing what he was signing. Exactly. Marcus leaned back, and Evelyn knew. I nodded. She had spent 6 years protecting the truth. My father had helped her begin, and Claire had unknowingly finished what they started. I looked at the last page again. There was one final handwritten sentence. If Walter finds File 17, tell him the truth was never meant to destroy his family. It was meant to protect it. I closed my eyes. My father hadn't betrayed me. My wife hadn't betrayed me. Evelyn hadn't betrayed me. I'd simply trusted the wrong people with the wrong documents. And now I finally knew who had been standing behind the lies. Richard Vale. We turned everything over to the authorities. The documents were enough to reopen the investigation. Richard was eventually arrested. The people who had followed Claire were identified. And Evelyn, 3 weeks later, Marcus received a letter. It contained only one sentence. Tell Walter I kept my promise to his father. There was no return address. I never learned where Evelyn went. Maybe that was the point. Some people disappear because they're running from the truth. Others disappear because they spent their entire lives protecting it. Months later, Claire returned to work. She didn't go back to the same department. She started her own design studio instead. On the wall of her new office, she framed one photograph. Not the photograph of Evelyn. Not the photograph from the warehouse. A photograph of her mother. And beside it, a photograph of my father. Two people who had never met in the way I'd once imagined. But both had left behind something worth protecting. One evening, Claire looked at me and asked, "Do you still have File 17? I smiled. No. She looked surprised. Where is it? I tapped my chest. Right here. Because after everything we discovered, I finally understood something. The most dangerous secrets aren't always the ones hidden in locked rooms. Sometimes they're the truths we ignore, because believing the people we love is easier. For 6 years, someone tried to bury the truth. For 6 years, I never thought to question the people I trusted. And if I hadn't walked into my daughter's office on her birthday, I might never have discovered what was hiding inside File 17.